Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Etheria Restart video. So in today's video, guys, we're going to be going over shells. I'm going to be showing you some things that some people might not reference too much in other shell videos, things like imprinting, things like rolling for your passive skills, things like that. But we're also going to be going over the shells in general, who they best fit on, and characters that if you have them, you might be overlooking some of these shells that could increase the power of your heroes. Now, I've mentioned in a couple different videos that shells are the most important thing to farm. Hands down. Modules are important, but shells are 100% the biggest boost to your account. So if you take a character like Shiada here on my account, you'll see that I have a mythic shell on Shiada. This is the highest rarity shell that you can get. These shells, the mythic shells, have way more advantage over the lower level shells for a couple reasons. The first one is their base stats that are added onto your character are much higher than, say, a epic or a unique or even a rare shell. It's not even close. The base speed that they have, attack, HP, all of it. The second thing that makes them very strong is their actual effects are way more impactful, especially later game. It is a huge boost every time one of these effects go off, which is why they have them on a cooldown, right? If they didn't, they'd be absolutely busted. That's the second thing. The third thing is their passive effects. So on mythic shells, you can roll up to 3 passive effects, and you do this each level that the shell levels up. So you see here that my shell is level 40 of 40, so these star levels allow you to roll into these passive effects. They're absolutely random, but you can re-roll those passive effects. This is why you're farming shells a lot, because in order to level up your shell and re-roll your passives, take a lot of this training data currency. It's actually a little too much. It's one of the things that I would love to see the developers change. You don't get nearly enough of this training data as you need within a amount of time that I think is reasonable. But yes, those are the 3 reasons. And then the bonus or fourth reason is these passive effects, even though you can roll 3 of them here, the epic shells underneath them can also roll 3 passive effects. But the roll threshold that epic shells can roll is lower than mythic shells. So case in point, in this passive slot 1, you see that if you roll an amplification passive on this shell, the highest you can get is 120. But if you were to roll a passive like that on, like, say, a count, the highest roll you can get here now is 180. That is a big difference. Same thing with the attack percentage. Your attack percentage right here, your threshold is 30%, where on your epic shells is 20. So you really want to prioritize the mythic shells. Thankfully, I think the game allows you accessibility to some of these mythic shells early enough that you can really build a whole bunch of teams with just mythic shells, and you'll eventually outpace these epic shells or unique shells or rare shells. Along the way, though, to your mythic shells, and I've said this in other videos, you will have to build up epic shells. As you see here, I have 5 epic shells that I fully leveled up. So I was 100% using these until I could eventually farm mythic shells. And once I was able to farm mythic shells consistently, then I kind of started replacing those epic shells. But along the way, you will have to level up those lower level shells to eventually get to the mythics. But the mythics are the things that you're going to be shooting for. They're the ones that you're going to be farming a lot. So in today's video, we will basically be touching on the mythic shells primarily, because you can get to them so quickly, and these are the ones that you're going to be heavily investing in instead of these lower level ones. But I do want to mention something. The mythic shells are usually just enhanced versions of what the lower level shells do. So you'll see, like on a shell like Red Comet, which is one of the first shells you'll get, it has an effect where it increases the owner's attack by 400, right? A unique shell does the exact same thing, except it's a higher threshold. So now this shell will do a 600 boost, on top of having stronger base attributes and higher passive effect rolls that we just looked at. And then as you move up, you'll see you get even more attack. Actually, oh yes, then you go into Crossroads. Crossroads gives you 900 attack, and it also gives you Life Leech. So however much damage you're doing, you get a percentage back in health, which is pretty nice. And then the highest level shell that does an effect like this is Count, so you're getting even more attack. So the mythic shells are kind of like the lower level shell rarities. They just have an increased version of that effect, which is why we're going to be touching on the mythic shells as much. But the reason why I wanted to mention that is if I'm talking about a shell in the mythic range and I'm saying it's good on a character, if you have not unlocked the mythic shell yet, you can go find the lower rarity of that shell down here and just apply it to the heroes that I've talked about. Okay? So let's jump into the shells, and then we'll talk about imprinting and matrices and all that stuff a little bit later. Okay? Some of these shells are very straightforward. Some of them, might require a little out-of-the-box thinking, or you didn't think that they fit in very well into a character, and hopefully that's kind of eye-opening for you. So the first one is Supernova. I think this one is quite straightforward. It increases your healing amount for 2 turns, and if during that turn you're healing one of your characters that has a 75% or less HP bar, it also adds a heal over time. This is an extremely powerful shell. It's very apparent that this needs to go on a healer. But something that you need to pay attention to is this effect activates for 2 turns. So even though this says that it's a 4-turn cooldown, it's essentially a 2-turn cooldown because this is active for 2 turns. You want to put this on healers that have multiple heals in their kit. So a Ling Luo is a perfect example of this because Ling Luo has a heal on her skill 3 and her skill 2. You also have someone like Sonya, Green Sonya, in the Epic slot or SR slot. Every turn that she goes, she's healing somebody. So this will be active basically all the time for Shadow Sonya until it comes back off of its cooldown. But she has a heal on her skill 3, and then her passive is healing all the time as well. So Sonya makes really good use of this. Same thing with Chiaki. You get the point. I will also tell you that this shell is extremely important in the Aurora Threshold dungeon. This is the true key because one of the mechanics in that dungeon is to reduce healing and your damage dealt based on this bubble shield, and the only way you break it is to heal through it. So if you can increase your healing, that allows your damage dealers to do more damage, and you can start healing up, because until you break it, you actually don't get any health back either whenever you heal. So Supernova is amazing for that dungeon. So next up is Law of Silence. Now, Law of Silence is one of those really interesting shells because not a lot of people use it, but it is a very niche shell in the fact that it provides you with a unique buff called Void. So it increases your effect resistance by 60%, and that character cannot be selected as the main target of an enemy skill. Also, it reduces the group damage taken by an additional 50%. A lot of people are sleeping on this shell for the Terramaton Threshold dungeon, okay? This is a striker shell, which means most of the matrices available to it are damage-dealing matrices. So you have your Onslaughts, you have your Keen Eyes, Brambles, all of those things down here, okay? The Terramaton left head will target somebody and put a defense down on them, which makes them very, very susceptible. So if you slap this onto one of your damage dealers, which tend to be the most squishiest, you can avoid that altogether. This also rotates every 4 turns, and the void state is up for 2 turns. The other nice thing about this shell is it also acts as damage mitigation for your other support heroes without having to do anything. This isn't something where the hero that's wearing this absorbs the damage. It just reduces the damage for AoE damage dealing skills, which the Terramaton has. So if you want to slap this like on a Leon or a Didding or something like that, it's not that bad. Because not only does it give you the void state, but it also increases your attack by 10% after the turn ends. So you're ramping up, which is really good. If you're able to incorporate this with one of those heroes that reduces skill cooldowns on a shell, even better. The effect res is actually pretty valuable on this buff as well, because Terramaton also puts up speed down and it pushes your turn meter back. So you have the ability to resist both of those effects. So I think a lot of people sleep on this shell. I haven't been able to build one up yet because I'm prioritizing other ones, but I think this is a sleeper shell for those reasons that I kind of mentioned. Also, another thing where it's good is if you guys are using a off element character like in the Doki Doki dungeon, or even some of these shell dungeons where you're using like a neutral affinity, those bosses tend to target the neutral affinity or weakest character. So if you need those characters to stay alive, this is another shell where I think you might be sleeping on it a little bit. So some food for thought. Okay. Now, Golden Lion, this is one that is just absolutely perfect for the new character that was just released at the making of this video, which is Yelly, the new SSR light hero, which I pulled, and I do have her equipped on it. However, I do not have the necessary modules to really showcase her, but she is coming in a future video. So if you guys want to stay tuned to that, you can. So I have her on the Golden Lion. Okay. So the Golden Lion actually had a wording incorrectly, but they recently changed it, so now it reads correct. So the effect on Golden Lion is every 2 times the owner Animus uses their skill 1, not a skill, which is what it used to say, skill 1, it increases the owner's final damage by 5% and effect accuracy by 7% up to 8 stacks. So that's a 40% boost to your final damage and a 56% boost to your effect accuracy. This is a big deal. Now, I want you to pay attention to the matrices available here because they don't have all the damage dealing matrices available to you. They just have momentum and keen eye, so they're missing harvest, right? And then they're also missing another one. Fury. They're also missing Fury. But they do have Onslaught, Keen Eye, and Momentum. But they also have Bramble. So that means that you can put this on a defense scaling hero as well, which is important because the effect on Golden Lion says final damage. It does not say attack. It's not attack percentage. It is just your final damage. So you can certainly slap this on a defense scaling hero. And Golden Lion, I think, is just like the Law of Silence shell, where it's very underrated. Now, who do you want to put this on? Okay? The most obvious heroes that you want to put this on are heroes that do follow-up attacks, right? And we have a couple of those. The first one that stands out to me is Fangus. Fangus is an amazing SR hero that only gets better in the endgame. So he has a passive where every opportunity that somebody does a damage-dealing skill and takes an attack, he has the chance to follow up. And what is he following up with? His skill 1. So the more follow-up attacks you get with Fangus, he's increasing his effect accuracy, which affects the chance of him inflicting his DOT, which is the big thing. But you also get the added effect of increasing his overall damage. So if he has a little bit of crit rate, a little bit of attack percentage, a little bit of crit damage, that's going to ramp up over time. So any of the heroes that have a follow-up attack, like Fangus, and then in the SSR region here, which is why I mentioned Bramble, is Rahu. Rahu is a defense scaling hero that has a follow-up attack anytime someone uses an attack skill where he's following up with his skill 1. So he's increasing his effect accuracy and his overall damage. This is really important because he also has a very relevant effect on his skill 1, which is a defense down. Now, on damage-dealing heroes, most people don't build effect accuracy. So if you're able to get that from the Golden Lion, that's just cherry on top, right? Now, the heroes that don't do follow-up attacks, I think, can still use Golden Lion, is heroes that just have passive effects, because they might have a skill 3 effect that they use, and then everything else is just going to be skill 1, skill 1, skill 1, until you're back to skill 3. So any of those heroes with a passive effect on their ability, I think, are an amazing option. Rosa is someone that I think you can certainly utilize. Rosa has turn meter pushback. This is based on your effect accuracy. This is also something where she has speed down on her skill 3. And again, you're most likely not building Rosa with effect accuracy. So if you can get that from Golden Lion and you have that bonus of having a possible speed down and more consistent turn meter pushback, because she's always just using her skill 1 on her follow-up attacks, it's an amazing shell on her, and I think quite underrated. So once I have mine fully built up, I'll be able to show you Yelly, who also does like a bunch of follow-up attacks on her skill 1. But the Golden Lion is a shell that I think a lot of people have slept on, including myself. Okay, so Alicorn is very straightforward. This is more of a PvP shell. However, it can be used in some cases in PvE because there's plenty of PvE content later on. Most notably in the anti-sync heroes, you know, that one-time event where you're trying to scale up against different bosses and you get like summon tickets and then like lattices as a one-time clear. There's a lot of cases where they bring in like crowd control heroes or turn meter pushback heroes, and if you have this like on a Ling Luo and you can guarantee that she dispels 2 of those debuffs, and then she can heal up the rest of your team and remove the control effects or debuffs from them, it tends to be a much easier path forward. But I think the most obvious is in arena modes where people are just using like Kazuyo the Reverie to sleep people or Kraken to freeze people. This is a great shell to also put on your healers or cleansers, where you can guarantee that they dispel those 2 debuffs that they just put on, and then you're able to just take all of your turns and their whole strategy is kind of out the window, right? Codex of Magic, I've talked about this one a lot in just separate videos of mine, but this is certainly one of the most powerful shells in the game, if not the most powerful. And that's because it completely resets a cooldown on one of the skills that you're about to use. It's very straightforward. The matrices that it has available to it are kind of the downsides. However, I will say that even without that, the fact that it has Swift Rush on it and the 6 matrix like special shell or special module still makes it plenty good. So you're slapping this on any of your crowd control heroes, the heroes that have like a big turn meter pushback and freeze, Marvel. You're putting on Kachi the Guard, who extends the debuffs, puts up immunity. You're putting it on, you know, Kraken, normal rare Kachi, who has a big turn meter pushback as well as a stun. Like, that's very straightforward. You can also use it on some healers. Like, even putting this on a Ling Luo so she has back-to-back huge heals is something that you can do. I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful this shell is just like in a vacuum. And then I think some people also overvalue it. But yeah, it's a very strong shell for sure. All right, White Fang, this is one of the first shells that you get, and it's quite good. I will say that I think it's probably just like a general good shell. It's not best in class in really any area, but it's mostly used in like one-shot teams or quick follow-up teams like with Ditting, because the shell itself actually does quite a lot of damage. All the matrices available to it are very good as well. It can be used in some longer fights because it does ramp up. Like I was using White Fang on my Shiata for a long time until I got Revelation. But this is more of a like the general cookie cutter shell that you're going to put on most strikers. So when it comes to Gigabyte, I've talked about Gigabyte kind of at nauseum, and I think this is one of the shells that you can throw on basically any character, and it's going to be good. But you do have to realize that the matrices available to it are not really for damage-dealing heroes, but you can make use, of the Swift Rush matrix on some of your damage-dealing heroes. To just have them loop around and go as often as possible is just not ideal. You're going to slap this on your supporter heroes. Any of your heroes that, you want to put debuffs up on the enemy, if you want to have buffs up on your entire line, so buffers, debuffers. It can also go on healers. I've used this on my Kachi, not my Kachi, my Chiaki, Red Chiaki SR for the longest time. I use this on my Kazuyo the Reverie. I've used this on Tsukiyomi. I've used it on Ling Luo. It is probably the most interchangeable shell available. So I personally have 3 of these built up. There are times where I kind of want 4, but that's for purposes like real-time arena and things like that. For PvE, at most, you'll probably need 3. If you want to do, more of a speed run instead of like a safe run, which we'll talk about in a shell later on. Well, actually, it's next, but that's Artisan. So Artisan has a bit of a cheese mechanic to it because it incorporates such a huge shield based on the Animus's defense. Now, you don't even need to have a lot of defense on your Animus for this shield to be awesome. This is amazing on defense damage-dealing heroes, for sure, like your Rahus, like your Holdens, just because the defense boost is going to increase their damage. But because this shield is on a 3-turn cooldown, there are a lot of ways to loop it with heroes like Tsukiyomi, like Mia, like, who's the other SR hero that I need to build up and showcase for you guys? Kazami Kazuyo. All of these heroes have a cooldown reduction on shells. So if you're able to have 3 characters in your team, like this character, like Tsukiyomi, and like Mia, they're going to be reducing all of their skill cooldowns and the shell cooldowns. So if you slap all of them in Artisan shells, like 4 of them wearing Artisan shells, you will just have these huge shells up the entire time, which really makes endgame content quite good. So if you want to go that route, it will be a lot slower for sure, but it could be a consistent run that maybe you run overnight, 1 or 2 times. And you're going to be clearing content that you probably wouldn't have been able to clear before. So you can build up as much as like 4 of these shells. And the nice thing about this shell as well is it doesn't really need to be awakened. A lot of shells benefit from awakening them, which I'll showcase at the end of this video. But this shell, you only need to get up to level 40 without awakening it, which costs a lot of that training data that I mentioned. So that is a really nice thing about Artisan. So it's got 2 uses. It can be a damage-dealing shell for defense-scaling heroes, or it can be a kind of cheese composition with all of those shells kind of stacking up and always having the shield up because you're reducing the cooldown of when the shield is applied. You can also use Kachi the Guard to extend the duration of this. Same thing with Mia. Same thing with Ling Luo. They all extend buff effects, which also apply to your shells. So Dark Moon, I think, is a shell that is meant for PvP. This is an okay shell for PvE, but I think it's a bit outclassed by things like Codex of Magic, by things like Gigabyte, where you can just loop around to the skills instead of extending the amount of debuffs that that you put on like the enemy heroes. So there are a couple things that are working for it. The first one is it deals 2 hits, so it does a little bit of damage. This is a nice shell to put on someone like a Gray because it's including some additional damage with your Gray, and it's putting the 3-turn defense down on all of the enemies, which is really nice. The reason why I think it's a PvP piece is because it gives you a 50% effect accuracy boost, where a lot of the teams in PvP do not have effect resistance on them. So you don't even have to build a debuffing hero with high effect accuracy if you use this shell. You can build those characters as damage dealing units and still get the debuffs off because of the 50% effect accuracy boost. So case in point was Gray. You also have heroes like Kloss. You can build Kloss with a little bit of damage. You can build Dinah with some more damage as well. Just a couple examples there. I'm sure you guys can think of more. I mean, Marvel is another one that you can also build in this because the res down and the speed down is a super relevant debuff. And if you have that up for 3 turns in PvP, I mean, that's essentially game over. So it's a bit underrated, but at the same time, sadly, I think it is outclassed by things like Codex of Magic and Gigabyte. But it is still a viable shell. Now, Halloween is a shell that I 100% slept on. I think this has a lot of competition with Gigabyte. So Gigabyte does not have a cooldown on its effect. So every 3 turns that the enemies take, you'll boost your turn meter, which is really important. But even though Halloween has a 3-turn cooldown, it has an extremely high chance of reducing the cooldown of a skill by 1 turn. And a lot of these skills on your animuses tend to have high cooldown, just high amount of cooldown durations. And even if they're latticed, sometimes the lowest they come down to is like 4 turns. So if you have the ability to turn that into a 3-turn or a 2-turn cooldown, that is really important. Now, the thing that I overlooked on Halloween is the fact that the animuses also reduce skill cooldowns on your shells. So if you're using those Mias and you're using those, Tsukiyomis, this thing is proccing way quicker than 3 turns. So not only are you looping back around to Halloween's effect, but Halloween has the ability to reduce the skill cooldown of the animus effect that is also reducing the skill cooldown of shells. So it kind of just like amplifies and builds upon itself, which is something that I totally overlooked. So when it comes to the matrices that you're almost entirely looking for on Halloween is Swift Rush Time Weave, because Time Weave has the ability to also reduce a skill cooldown as well. So to just stack those things on top of each other, it gets out of control kind of quickly. So yeah, but there's going to be other times where you're mixing and matching the your matrices there. So just keep that in mind. Now, Count's a great shell that I think went unnoticed for a while because I think people were overvaluing Revelation, which we'll talk about here in a second. I think this shell is overall better than White Fang. However, White Fang gets a little more praise because currently in the meta, it's quite easy to one-shot things. So you want the additional damage out of the White Fang more so than the Count itself increasing the Animus's attack and giving it a little bit more longevity with the Life Leech effect. But as more and more content comes out that is harder for someone like Didding to one-shot, I think Count you'll see climb up the ranks, as a little bit better of a shell than White Fang. So the 1200 attack is a big boost, and it's for 2 turns. So something that people don't realize is with count, you're able to stack a lot more crit damage on your heroes because count adds such a big boost to your base attack. If you're also, again, running those heroes that reduce skill cooldowns on your shells, it's like the 1200 attack is up permanently. So I think that, like I said, as you'll see as the game progresses, I think count's going to end up becoming the premier shell for damage dealers overall. Where White Fang right now is like the cookie cutter damage shell, I think count eventually turns into that, where you need more sustain out of your damage dealer. But all of your damage dealing heroes can certainly work on this. Where you won't prioritize count is where you'll prioritize Revelation. Now, I'm going to jump over those other 2 shells just to talk about Revelation because we're on count right now. So Revelation's effect is, it's kind of weird to read it, okay? But all you need to know is Revelation procs every 3 turns, and on each critical hit that you do, and the key word there is hit. It does not mean skill. Each hit will do indirect damage equal to 12% of the target's max HP. Okay? It can't exceed 180% of your self-attack. So you have to hit like a threshold on your attack in order to deal the maximum amount of 12% HP. At least that's how I think that reads. If not, if you're just doing 12%, no matter what, that is also amazing. But the important thing to know about Revelation is each time you're critting with a hit, okay? What I mean by that is if you take a look at characters like Shiada, right? This is where she's used the most, Revelation. Is because when Shiada fully levels up her souls, her skill 3 actually hits 4 times. So, like I told you, Revelation procs on each critical hit. So if Shiada crits on all 4 of her hits on her skill 3, Revelation will proc 4 times. So 4 times at 12% of the HP of the enemy is a huge amount of damage, which is why Shiada does so much damage in Doki Doki. Now, there's a lot of other heroes that can take advantage of Revelation that a lot of people don't know about, right? The first one is Freya. You can build Freya as a damage dealer if she's in Revelation, because Freya has a 4-hit skill on her skill 3. She also has a double hitter on her skill 1. Because this is a 4-turn cooldown, you won't be able to loop back around to this on the second Revelation proc. So you will be hitting on your skill 1 whenever Revelation goes back off a cooldown. So you're getting a double hitter. So Freya is one of those heroes that wears Revelation well. I think a lot of people have seen videos about Sustenance lately too, because she also has a 4-hitter on her skill 3. And this is on a 3-turn cooldown once it's fully skilled up. So that means that her and Revelation's skill cooldowns are on the same time schedule. So if you fully skill this up, your Revelation and your skill 3 will always be available to be activated at the same time, which is why I think Sustenance has become quite powerful in the meta and has been slept on, even by me, for sure. Now, other heroes that kind of wear this well, which I've seen some people start doing, is Kazuya the Reverie. This is a great kind of tech find by the community, because I don't know if a lot of people have run into this problem like I have, but there might be a time where your main damage dealer in Doki Doki, which most people only run 1, might die from RNG. She might be targeted and your whole run is scratched. But if you run someone like Kazuya the Reverie, also in Revelation, not only do you have her being built to, CC and remove that damage reduction from Doki Doki, but now you have a sub DPS that if your Shiata dies, you still have a chance to clear that run because you have a revelation on your Kazuyo. And if you've noticed, Kazuyo also has a 3-turn cooldown, similar to Sustenance, where revelation will always be available to her whenever she's activating her skill 3. So if you have a multi-hit damage-dealing hero, you're going to use revelation. If you just have one big hit, you're most likely going to want to use count on your damage dealer. All right? All right, back to our turn order lineup here. So Lighthouse is next. Lighthouse has a very strong ability where if you take damage over 25%, you'll heal it right back up and then increase your turn meter by 25%, which is awesome. I think one of the things that a lot of people overlook on this shell is it's on a 2-turn cooldown. This is a big deal. If you are running just even a little bit of speed on the character that is wearing this, this is almost going to be up all the time. So a 25% boost to your turn meter, along with just healing things back up, this can get really out of control with some of these heroes that are just super tanky. I think slapping this on a Rahu is really, really toxic. The more that Rahu sits around and just builds up those Wrath stacks, he gets really hard to kill. And if he's healing up back his health and also boosting his turn meter where he's just able to keep spamming his skill 3 AoE, I love this on him. This is a universal shell, which is really nice. It has the defense matrices, but it also has speed and time weave matrices. So I think if you don't know who or what kind of shell to put on a character and it's a support hero, I'd put this more on a buffer or a healer. But if you want to have it on a tank DPS hero like a Rahu or a Holden, I also think that's a perfectly fine hero to slap this on, because like a Bramble Time Weave or an Unbreakable Time Weave on a Holden or a Rahu is still extremely good. I really like this shell. Now, Jackal Guard is a great shell. However, the thing that works against Jackal Guard is the fact that most people right now are running those 4 main heroes that have speed up. So the Mios, there's 5 heroes. Doki Doki, right? Doki Doki, Mio, Lily, Tsukiyomi, or the SR Fire hero that I can never remember her name. If you're running those heroes and you have speed up, Jackal Guard's utility kind of goes down a little bit. So even though it does really good damage and it puts an amazing buff up, a 3-turn speed up, and also a turn meter boost, the thing is if you have someone who puts speed up on your team already, it kind of takes away, a third of the utility of Jackal Guard. Now, Jackal Guard, I think, is absolutely amazing in PvP because the turn meter boost, as well as the additional damage and the speed up, you're not always going to have your speed up character get through on RTA, right? They're most likely banning your Lily or your Mio or your Doki. Tsukiyomi tends to get through because a lot of people kind of underestimate her still. But I think that's where Jackal Guard's going to be great. I think he's an amazing character to put on Gray. I think Gray wears this shell so well because he can reduce the skill cooldown of Jackal Guard like all the time. So he's getting so much turn meter boost. He's also dealing tons of great damage. But you can also slap this on all of those sub DPS debuffers. Your Colossus, your Dynas, and things like that. It's more of a support role. But like I said, if you have one of the AoE speed buffers, it kind of goes by the wayside, where if you don't, this shell should be your top priority for your debuffers and your buffers. So Amber is one of those shells that is going to be niche. I think you're going to see this shell mainly in PvP. In the beta, it was used on Tiamat because once Tiamat procced, she'd go into her ultimate form, and then she would also, have half her health back. So it kind of spiraled. But since Tiamat's health gain has been decreased with the global launch, you don't see that as much. Where you're going to see Amber is in one-shot teams where you're going to bring a buffer that is like a negative element of the dungeon you're running. So you'll see this in a lot of endgame runs from content creators that had access to the test server, right? They were using a hero like Yang. Yang gave attack up and crit rate up to your characters, and they were using him in Terramaton, where he was going to die instantly. But the nice thing is with Amber, he would survive the very first hit from the Terramaton, and it gave you enough time to have the rest of your heroes kill the Terramaton before he could eventually hit Yang again and kill him. That's where this hero is going to be used, this shell. It's just going to be one of those one-shot speed comps where you're using this to save one of your characters to get around a fail. So I'm not a huge fan of this shell. I haven't personally found a nice way to use it, but I see the potential in it for those speed runs at the end of the game. Now, the last shell we're talking about is Fortissimo, which is very similar to Supernova, okay? This, though, is like a huge heal at a certain amount of time, but it can also still take advantage of those cases where a scenario like this might happen, where the AI, if you're running something on auto, let's say one of your heroes took a hit, but the rest of your team is healthy. Your healers will end up prioritizing their skill 3 or their big heal to heal up that one character, which may seem like a waste. But if they're wearing Fortissimo, they will store some of that healing up. So the next turn that they come around, if the boss then does a huge hit and the rest of your team is now below like 60%, this shell stored up some of the healing on that quote-unquote wasted skill, and then it will heal up your team again and then go on a 2-turn cooldown, which will then, case in point, most likely time up with your next big skill 3 heal again. So this is a great shell. I will tell you, though, that you should not use this shell in the Aurora dungeon because it takes away some of the healing and stores it for another heal later on, where you just want like a huge burst heal with Supernova to break that cursed shield that Aurora has. Okay? But in all other cases, Fortissimo, I think, is a bit better, and it adds a little bit more consistency to runs because how dumb the AI is. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so that's all the shells. I know this was long, but I thought it was important. Now, a couple things to remember is on your shells, you can re-roll your passives. So if you don't like a passive like this and you want it to be a little bit stronger, you have the ability to re-roll them using reconfig chips and training data. This is going to take a lot. This is why you should be farming shells a lot. The type of passive effects that you're looking for, very straightforward. If your heroes have any amount of damage, you're looking for crit damage, you're looking for attack, you can even roll for speed. The passive slot 3, you have a general damage dealt roll, or it can be more specific and have a higher roll based on the element of your hero. So you can roll 12% final damage versus a flat 8%. However, it makes that shell less transferable to another damage-dealing hero. So do remember that. The last thing I want to mention before I get out of here is if you have fully leveled up a hero, right, and they're awakened. If you go to imprint, it says fully ascended. That means you can't imprint it. That's not true. So if you have a shell, like this White Fang, right, that's awakened, and I'm trying to imprint it, and it says fully ascended, but I don't like these matrices. What I can do is I can find another White Fang, and I can find like an Onslaught and Keen Eye. This is where I imprint this shell. Okay, so even though it's awakened, if I don't like the matrices of Fury Momentum and I want Onslaught Kenai, I can imprint that shell, which has been fully leveled up, has these good passives, but I just want the matrices. I can imprint it onto this. Everything stays the same, except now that shell will have these matrices. So a lot of people don't know that, and you should know it, okay? Because that's a huge deal. And I just wanted to reference that. So if you look at my shell inventory, and then we'll get out of here, I have tons of these shells, okay? You need tons of them to level up. You need multiple abilities. You need multiple copies of these to eventually get to the next level. But I'm just saving all of these right now until I have enough of the shells built up where I know I won't need any more, and then I will recycle them. But when you're looking at your shell matrices on which ones you want to use to level up the next shell, I'm telling you right now, if it doesn't have 3 of each matrix, you should not keep it. You should only level up the 3 matrix shells because it really helps with your module building. And it's just something that you're making your life way harder than it should be if you're not keeping just the 3 matrix shells. Okay, guys? So, extremely long video. I'm very sorry. I hope you got a lot out of this. I hope I explained it well enough and who you're hoping to use these shells on. But yeah, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya.